Okay, so by no particular order, I'll begin with this question right here. Hello, dear Rabbi. If it's possible to answer this question during a question and answer video. So this is the question. What role did Jesus play in Jewish history? And why did Jews betray him? The reason for this question is because so many people are turning to Jews for Jesus. And this group believes that Jewish people have been that Jewish people been lied to, that he is a true Messiah. I don't believe that at all, but you're very, and I believe you would know how to answer this correctly. So the question again is, what role did Jesus play in Jewish history, and why did Jews betray him? Chana, by the way, my co-host, we have someone waiting in the waiting room. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to allow you to admit them. Fine, thank you. Anyhow, so again, the first question for tonight, what role did Jesus play in Jewish history, and why did Jews seemingly betray him? And the reason for this question is this person is asking is because she sees a lot of Jews joining for Jews for Jesus. That's a missionary movement, really, causing Jews to somehow deviate from the Jewish path and stop believing in Jesus. So that's why she's asking, this woman is asking this question. So I'll put it as bluntly as possible. There is no evidence. There is no evidence that a Jesus existed, not in Jewish sources and not in general sources, not archaeological evidence and not scientific evidence. There is no evidence that Jesus existed. Yes, there is evidence of some of his students that came much later. Maybe Paul is the one who made up this idea of Jesus. 12 students as the New Testament teachers, but there is no real evidence that Jesus existed. Now, there is a Jesus that's mentioned in the Talmud. That Jesus did not live in the same time as the Jesus that Christians believe in. They say at least that Jesus lived in. The Jesus that's mentioned in the Talmud that was Jewish indeed is a Jesus that lived in about the year 150 BCE, during the times of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachya. In fact, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachya, who was a Mishnaic rabbi, was his teacher. So I don't know if there was an active act of betrayal of Jews against Jesus, because Jesus is much more of an idea than anything else. Now, I'm going to elaborate on this and say that I think that's one of the great advantages of Judaism versus other religions. See, Judaism is founded, what's our basis? The Torah. The giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai. Now, during the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai, there were 3 million Jews, even more. 3 million Jews who testified this giving of the Torah. These Jews passed down the written Torah that they received along with the oral Torah that they received on Mount Sinai, which is somewhat of a guide to the written Torah, from generation to generation. No one, we know Jews, they love to question, they love to argue, they love to disagree. But no one has ever thought to fight against this very basis, because the testimony of 3 million Jews was as clear of evidence as could get. Now, beyond that, the Torah has many commandments that have not only been passed down, but have been proven to be true as archaeological evidences. For example, the oldest pair of tefillin is about 2,400 years. It's the exact same tefillin that I and so many wear each and every day. Now, there's evidence right there that, there you go, the archaeological evidence that the Torah is true. Beyond the 3 million people have passed down that faith from generation to generation. Now, so it's really based on 3 million people, Judaism. Christianity, for example, is based on one person, Jesus, or maybe 12 students. What if they were elucidating that day? Maybe the whole religion could go down the drain. Not denigrating, God forbid, other religions. And I think, by the way, that it's better to be a religious non-Jew than a non-religious non-Jew, because the idea of religion, I think, is vital for society. And that's a different question, and we can speak about it at different times. But let's go to the Islamic religion. Islamic religion is based on Muhammad. Muhammad, the prophet who prophesied that religion. One person. What if Muhammad was smoking on that day some was on psychedelics or something like that, that maybe the whole religion then goes down the drain. I'm not denigrating anything, but again, it's based on something very, very loose. And there's no, at least in Christianity, there's no evidence whatsoever. And I'll dare anyone and everyone to prove some type of actual evidence that that Christianity and that Jesus existed. So that's the answer to that question. I'm sure that you know, and again, from your question, I deduct that you probably know, and I'm speaking directly not to this person, that you know people who were sucked by this missionary group of Jews for Jesus, Jews who were sucked by this group. And if you do, and if they are brainwashed, then I'm happy to speak with them. And I've had many conversations with people like that, and we can go on and on and on and on. But that's my offer to you. Okay, that's question number one. Question number two. So if a boy was born to a Jewish mother and to an Israeli father who was not circumcised, is he considered to be Jewish? So I'm not sure if the Israeli father, I don't understand the question, if the Israeli father was not circumcised or if the boy himself was not circumcised, but regardless, the answer is the same. If you're born to a Jewish mother, whether you're circumcised, whether your father is circumcised, it doesn't matter, you're Jewish. Now, of course, you should circumcise your boy. And it's what really, in a way, concretizes your Judaism in a very, very physical way. But your Judaism is not dependent on your circumcision. In fact, your Judaism is not dependent on any performance of any mitzvah. Your Judaism is dependent on your Jewish mother. And if your mother was Jewish, then you too are Jewish. And you have the same soul as you and everyone here on this call has. So it's not dependent on circumcision. Now, yes, you should absolutely encourage that person to circumcise, and you should absolutely encourage that person to do more mitzvot. I think it's like anyone that has something that he was born with, that it would be really a shame for that person not to exercise that. Imagine that Mozart was born without a piano, later a violin. There wouldn't be a Mozart. It would be a shame for him and a shame for the world. So God gives us all these mitzvahs for us to use the instruments that can make our identity shine and create the sweetest melodies. So circumcision is one of them, and so many others. It would be a shame for a Mozart not to have a piano, as it is a shame for a Jew not to have Judaism. But again, the Judaism of the Jew does not make him or disqualify him as a Jew. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew because he was born to a Jewish mother, again, because he was converted according to halakha. So that's the answer to that question. Okay, next question. This is a two question email. Question number one, there seems to be some connection between Sukkot and Thanksgiving. Is there any history? It's a good question. I don't know of any direct connection between Sukkot and Thanksgiving, even though Sukkot has a very strong element of thanksgiving, of gratitude. Sukkot is the time in which we are thankful to Hashem for cleansing us on Yom Kippur, for re-embracing us, for giving us another year, for agreeing to reign upon us one more year, and for sealing us, hopefully, as we hope, in the good books. So there's a very strong element of gratitude in Sukkot. I don't know if there's a direct connection between Sukkot and Thanksgiving. Just by the way, a fun question, even though it's not connected to this, but do you know why we eat turkey on Thanksgiving? It's a deeply Jewish idea. Next, because the word for turkey in Hebrew is hodu. Hodu in Hebrew has a double meaning. It means turkey, but it also means thank you. We say it every day in our prayer. Hodu LaHashem ki tov. Thank you, God, because He's good. Ki l'olam chesdo, His kindness endures forever. Hodu means thank you and means turkey. So to express our thanksgiving on Thanksgiving, we eat turkey. That means thank you in Hebrew. By the way, the founding fathers most probably spoke Hebrew. In fact, the oldest translation of the English translation of the Bible is from a guy named Hainsworth, and that's a translation that that is probably the most accurate, much better than the King James translation and other translations. It also has a commentary to it. I have it at home, but it costs like $400 on Amazon because you don't have too many copies. But from that, and that's the Bible that most probably the founding fathers used. And from that translation, it's quite evident that you needed to speak Hebrew in order to understand the Torah. So they probably most probably spoke Hebrew, and there's other, proofs to that too. But so they knew what they were doing when they introduced this custom of having turkey on Thanksgiving. But that's a side note. Question number 2. I have read Rabbi Stern's book on the soul. I'm looking to continue broadening my views. Any suggestions, either from Gershon Sholem or any other authors with a somewhat mystical viewpoint? So absolutely, Rabbi Stern says a book on the soul, by the way, which is a brilliant book. I have it right here. And it's in Hebrew right here, otherwise I would show it to you. But Rabbi Stern says other books. It's called The 13 Petal Rose. That's another book. Oh, there you go, Ron. Ron is pointing to the book, The Soul. I would encourage everyone to read it. It's really one of the most enriching and uplifting books you can read about your soul. So many books speak about parts of you, but very few books speak about your essence, your soul. And this book, you'll get to know yourself better when you read that book, The Soul. But in addition to The Soul, you have the 13 Petal Rose by Rabbi Steinsaltz, The Strife of the Spirit by Rabbi Steinsaltz, which all speak about the soul. Now, if you want to go beyond Rabbi Steinsaltz, then I would encourage you reading the Tanya. The Tanya is a book that you don't read really, it's a book that you study. But the first part of the Tanya, Likutei Amarim, that we study, by the way, each and every Sunday morning at 7:15 a.m. in our soul study, speaks about the soul too. So I would encourage you to read the Tanya, to study the Tanya too. Okay, next question.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Can I just say, I have a good friend who is Christian, and her son and our daughter-in-law are ministers, but the son, they're studying also Judaism. He's very wonderful. And he loves, I send him sometimes things from you. And he asked me, I told him about Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he said he was studying about the soul from the a Jewish perspective. So I sent it to him for a gift. And the soul, and he loved beautiful. It. He was so he loves sharing all kinds of things, but he loved it, and he was so. I just wanted to say it transcends.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely. I know stories about the 13 Petal Rose. There's a pastor here in Phoenix that, out of the blue, he reached out to me and he spoke to me about how the 13 Petal Rose has impacted him so deeply.
Yeah.
So absolutely, this transcends any borders and barriers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. So this question is about this week's portion. Can you please explain the punishment of the snake? Okay, so let me give you the context of this week, and I suppose that this is where you're coming from, but it's actually a fascinating point. So in this week's portion in Bereshit, we speak about how the snake seduced Adam and Eve to eat from the forbidden tree, the tree of knowledge. And then, we won't go into the whole story, but then they were punished by God because God had commanded them very strictly not to eat from this tree. The snake was punished for seducing Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were punished for eating from the tree. Adam was punished that his livelihood would come with toil, with labor, bezat apechat ochal lechem, with sweat. And Eve was punished also that she would suffer with childbirth, that it would be painful for her to give betzar tildi banim. With suffering, you will give birth to children. What was the snake's punishment? Snake's punishment was al gechoncha telech va'afar tochal kol yemei chayecha. To quote the exact words of the Torah, that you won't have legs anymore. Snakes may have had legs. Maybe that's where dinosaurs came from. But that he will have to slide his body in order to move around. Al gechoncha telech. And then he will eat dust his entire life. That will be his source of livelihood. I suppose the question is, what type of a punishment is that? And by the way, it's a question that the Kotzker Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern of 250 years ago asked. And other commentaries asked this question, but I'm picking his commentary because it's my favorite one. He asked the question, what type of a punishment is that? Because the snake now, if he's going to have dust as his livelihood, he won't have to work for it. How can it's not fair? Adam has to sweat in order to earn a living. Until today, we have to work hard to make a living. The snake, who's really the reason for the sin, he's the one who seduced Adam and Eve. He has his livelihood ready for him all the time. He doesn't need to work. It's not a punishment, it's a reward. But the answer that Kotzker Rebbe gives is as follows. And that is that God was telling the snake, look, I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't bother me. Just don't speak to me anymore. I'll give you all your livelihood. It'll be ready for you. Just you and I can't have a relationship with you anymore. Just don't bother me. Here's everything you want. It's like, it reminds me of I remember sitting a few years ago with a father of a 16-year-old child, and it just broke my heart. 16-year-old child whose parents had a bitter divorce, and he had 2 bar mitzvahs, just to give you a glimpse into it. 2 bar mitzvahs because they couldn't get along. I'm saying to myself, lucky florists, lucky musicians, they get 2 jobs, lucky photographer, and so unlucky child. Anyway, fast forward 3 years, the child gets an apartment for free. His father was very wealthy, credit card to use whenever he wants, a brand new car. I think it was a Jaguar, whatever. He got everything he wanted. And he just told his son, you know what? I know you don't like my new partner. He had a new woman in his life, his father. So here's an apartment, here's a car. Just don't visit me too much. And let me make sure that it's okay with her when you come and visit, so call me beforehand. And his son, what he did is that he took the keys of the car, the keys of the apartment, took the credit card, he threw it on his father and he said, I don't want you. I don't want your new girlfriend. I don't want anything. I don't want any of this. All I asked is for a relationship with you. And his father came to cry and say, I don't know what to do with my son. But it reminds me again a little bit of the snake. God gave the snake a Ferrari. He gave him an apartment. He gave him everything. I just don't want a relationship with you. And that's the worst punishment that you can receive, really. In a way, it also sheds light a little bit on suffering and on pain. Sometimes we suffer. And that's because God is saying, you know what? I want a relationship with you. Hello, wake up. Let's speak to each other. Sometimes you have to make noise in order for someone to wake up in their relationship. Sometimes pain is that noise. Not justifying pain. I'm not justifying suffering because I don't think anyone can justify pain and suffering. Anyone can answer the big question of why. But it's certainly a sign that God is in a relationship with us. He wants us to be there with him. And we want deeply inside, if you read the book, The Soul, that we were mentioning, you deeply inside also want a relationship with him. Sometimes it takes trouble, it takes challenge, it takes working, it takes sweat in order for that relationship to exist. The snake doesn't have the privilege of having pain, of having challenges, because he doesn't have the privilege of God saying, I want a relationship with you. And that's the worst punishment one can receive. I think that's, by the way, one of the great revelations of Judaism. Speaking, going back to the question about Christianity, but the way we view our relationship with God is very different than Islam views the relationship with God, or Christianity, or Buddhism, or other religions. Islam, God is the master, you're the servant, you're the slave. That's why Islam means to subdue yourself like a slave. Christianity, you have the Father, who's God, and the Son, who's us. Unless you're the embodiment, the Son, whatever. Judaism, we don't see God as the Father. We don't see God as the Master. Yes, there's elements of God, there's facets of God that are Father and Master. But who is God? God is our partner. That's why the word for mitzvah in Hebrew comes from the word sevet, which means partnership. When we do a mitzvah, we partner with God. God is our partner, and therefore we can shout at God. We can protest God. That's what prayer is about. We say to God, hello, You're not doing your side of the job. If this is a partnership, why is there evil in the world? I'm trying my best to do my side. But that partnership, of course, involves much strife, much tension. But that in and of itself is one of the great blessings. If there was no partnership, again, like that father saying to his son, take it all. Take the 100% part of the business. I don't want to have anything to do. You have it all. Yeah, millions of dollars, I don't care. I'll be poor. Still, there's no relationship. What's the whole point? But the mere fact that God is saying this is a 50-50 business. We're partners here, right here. And yes, we'll have some tension. And I'll give you some pain, like you'll give me some pain. But that's part of any relationship. It's part of marriage, it's part of friendships, it's part of our relationship. That's what God is saying. Then we should actually celebrate that. It's a cause of celebration. Rabbi Zusha, who was one of the great Hasidic masters, he lived a life of tremendous suffering. Tremendous suffering. Not only was he penniless, but he also was very sick. His family was sick. He had a son who died, I think. Terrible suffering. But Rabbi Zusha would, each time he would be in pain, he would quote the halacha saying that that a person is obligated to bless the bad that he's experiencing as one is obligated to bless the good that one is experiencing. And he would erupt in a dance of joy each time he would experience bad. Now, that's a very Hasidic thing to do, but it connects to what we're saying. Sometimes pain is just God saying, hey, I want a relationship with you. The Talmud says that if something bad happens to a person, then a person should examine his ways. Maybe he wasn't a good partner with God. If one examined his way and he didn't find anything wrong, he was the ultimate partner. Then this is suffering of love. It's just God saying, hey, I love you. That's what suffering is sometimes. I love you. I have a relationship with you. I love you. Now, the snake doesn't have that. Snake has a Ferrari. He has an apartment on the beach, right next to the sea. He has everything he wants. He has a credit card. He can swipe anytime he wants. But he doesn't have a relationship. The partner isn't there. He was given 100% of the partnership. That's not something we want. And that explains the punishment of the snake, to answer that question.
Rabbi?
Yes.
When you said about our Father, that God is not our Father, but when we pray, don't we say Avinu Malkeinu?
So as I said, there's a facet of God that's a father.
Oh, there is. Okay.
The facet of God that's a father. But essentially, if we had to go to the essence of God, who is he? What is our relationship all about? It's about a partnership. About a partnership. Yeah. Okay, next question. So, and this is the final question for today, and then I'll open this up to any questions you may have. But, dear Rabbi, my mother insists on me inviting my brother for Shabbat dinner each and every week. This brother opposes everything Jewish. He makes a point of not participating in any traditions and refuses to even cover his head for Kiddush. All he does is eat, grumble, and then leave. He has no respect for our traditions and for our family. Is there any point in having him there? So, good question. First of all, there is a point. When your mother tells you something, there's a mitzvah, kibud avahem. Listen to what your mother has to say. And especially, there's no greater joy for a parent than to see their children getting along together. So if that makes your mother happy, even if you have to swallow your pride and swallow your pain, makes your mother happy, do it. But I want to go beyond that. And I think that there's a precedence for this in the Torah. How do we know this? I'm not comparing your brother, God forbid, to this man that I'm about to mention, but just keep this in mind. In the story of Purim, we all are familiar with the story of Purim, where the Queen Esther, was Jewish, summoned the king, Ahasuerus, and Haman, who had issued a decree to exterminate the Jewish nation, to a feast. And her plan was to tell the king during the feast that, hey, this man wants to exterminate me and my nation. So she summons them to a feast, but during their first feast, nothing happens. Nothing happens. She only tells the king that this man, during a second feast, the next day that she organized for them, during the first feast, nothing happens. What happens? The Megillah tells us, the story of Purim tells us that Haman, this evil man, went home sameach v'tuv lev, happy and good-hearted. Now, the commentaries ask, is this a way to describe an evil man like Haman, a Hitler? He wanted to exterminate the Jewish nation. Can you say that Hitler is happy, good-hearted, tuv lev? What is this? And the commentaries point out this, that the mere fact, listen to this, this is unbelievable. The mere fact that Haman came to dine with Queen Esther, with this pious woman, to eat from her food, to be in her presence, changed something in him, made him happy and good-hearted. Did it last? No, not at all. The next day he was the same evil man. Did his intentions change? No. He still wanted to exterminate the Jewish nation. But the Talmud says that the great-grandchildren of Haman were Torah scholars in Israel. So maybe it skipped his generation, it skipped the next generation. But just the mere fact that he had a meal with Esther, this evil man, changed something in him. And that's something had an impact for generations to come. It's unreal. But I believe that that's the same case. God forbid I'm not comparing your brother to Haman. I'm sure he's much, much more righteous, much more noble. And of course, by being just Jewish, he's already on a higher level with the Jewish soul. But what I'm saying is that never underestimate the power of Shabbat food, of being in your presence. It has an effect somewhere, somehow. You might not see it immediately. It might skip a few generations. You might not see it immediately. It might take a few years. But just by having him in your home and giving him Shabbat food, which in and of itself is a mitzvah, having him listen to the Kiddush, which in and of itself is a mitzvah, with a kippah, without a kippah, doesn't matter. But just having him there and eating your food, your Shabbat food, that has an impact that no one can tell its ripple and its eternity. That's really what we learn from the story of Haman and Purim. And it ties to the general idea that we can never underestimate the power of one mitzvah. Give you another biblical example, but it's interesting to note that Moses had many wars on the way to conquering the land of Israel, which eventually his successor did, Joshua. He had many wars. He fought with Sichon, he fought with Amalek. We read about the many wars that Moses had, but there's one war in which it says that Moses was afraid. In fact, God had to come and tell him, don't be afraid. Al tira, ki bi'adcha natati oto. Don't be afraid of this man. Which man? Og, the king of Bashan. Moses had to fight him with the nation, but he was afraid. And God told him, don't be afraid, I will deliver him in your hands. Why was he afraid? Why was he afraid? And Rashi points out that's because of one mitzvah that Og did many years before that. Og lived a very long life. He lived in the times of Abraham. When Abraham was also in a position of great tension in the world, many people wanted to fight Abraham. His nephew was kidnapped. Abraham's nephew was kidnapped. Og came to Abraham and told him, you should know your nephew was just kidnapped. Maybe you should go and rescue him. That was a mitzvah that Og did. He made Abraham aware that his nephew was kidnapped. Abraham then went and fought that war and released his nephew Lot. Now, that's the mitzvah that he did. Now, I just want to put this mitzvah into the proper context because Og didn't have any good intentions. Og was an evil man. You know why he told Abraham to go and rescue his nephew? Not because he really cared for his nephew, but because Og had a crush on Abraham's wife, Sarah, who was one of the most beautiful women in history. He hoped that when Abraham would go and try and rescue his nephew, Abraham would be killed and then he could marry his wife, Sarah. Now, it's still considered to be a mitzvah because the mitzvah is deed-based, it's not intention-based. That mitzvah is what gave him that merit that Moses was so afraid of many, many generations later. Moses said, well, he told Abraham about that nephew. Yes, his intentions were wrong, but he still did that mitzvah. I'm afraid. So what do we learn from this? Never underestimate the power of one mitzvah. One mitzvah can give you merit that you can't even fathom. One mitzvah can have a ripple effect that we can't even understand. That Shabbat food that you are giving to your brother I can promise you, whether he appreciates it or doesn't, whether, like you said, all he does is eats, grumbles, and leaves, don't worry about it. You're having a powerful, beyond the imagination impact on his soul, on his neshama, and that will bear some fruits someday, somehow.